No progress without change. A jolt of panic gripped Mark as he found himself alone on a deserted train platform in the dead of night. His breath hung in the cold air, and his pulse hammered in his ears. What was he doing here? He couldn't remember deciding to come. Yet something had drawn him to this obscure station. A faint whistle cut through the silence, sending a chill down his spine. No trains were scheduled at this hour. He glanced at the tall station clock, its hands hovering at midnight. That made no sense. He was sure it had been well past 1 in the morning when he left his apartment. Something felt off, as if reality had shifted without warning. Out of nowhere, the platform lights flickered, and in the distance, a single headlamp emerged, moving swiftly along the tracks. Within seconds, an old train, its cars worn and windows fogged, slid into the station, screeching and vibrating as though it hadn't been used in decades. A door hissed open. The interior glowed with pale, flickering lights. Mark hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around and flee, yet curiosity tugged at him with an almost magnetic force. He took a hesitant step forward, recalling a phrase that had replayed in his mind all week: no progress without change. His late father used to repeat it whenever Mark balked at taking risks. The memory of his father's voice seemed to push him onward until he was stepping into the carriage. Inside, the stale air smelled faintly of dust and oil, a relic of an era long gone. Seats lined both sides, many of them ripped, foam protruding from slashes. Far down the aisle stood a single passenger in a long, dark coat, gray hair framing a face touched by a strange mix of sorrow and anticipation. The man spoke in a calm, measured tone. "I've been waiting for you, Mark." Fear prickled at the back of Mark's neck. How did this stranger know his name? Before he could ask, the train lurched forward. In moments, the station lights disappeared behind the fogged windows. Mark's heart drummed faster. He wanted answers. Where was this train going, and how did this man know him? Yet the more he tried to speak, the more his throat seemed to close up, as though the train itself were swallowing his voice. Eventually, he forced out a question. "Where are we headed?" The stranger's eyes flickered with something between empathy and regret. "Somewhere you should have confronted a long time ago." They rode in uneasy silence. Time lost its bearings. Minutes felt like hours, yet the journey seemed brief. At last, the train ground to a halt outside a massive, dilapidated building ringed by flickering street lamps. The sign above the entrance was peeling, but two faded words remained visible: Evergreen Institute. Mark's father used to mention working on the outskirts of town, investigating railway safety. This place matched the location, yet it felt more like a monument to secrets than a simple job site. The stranger led Mark inside through a side door. The corridors were dark and smelled of damp concrete. Shards of old posters clung to the walls, and overhead pipes dripped water onto the grimy floor. Mark froze when his flashlight revealed graffiti across one corridor. No progress without change. letters scrawled in battered black paint. The jolt of recognition snatched the air from his lungs. This was his father's mantra. Why was it here? Another figure emerged from a nearby room, a woman clutching a flashlight, eyes darting with caution. She introduced herself as Marta, and it was clear from her strained expression that she'd been expecting Mark. Without explanation, she turned and guided them to a cavernous space lined with rusted machines and broken screens. Papers lay scattered on desks, some held together with brittle clips. In nearly every file Mark glanced at, he saw his father's name, Arthur. His heart pounded as Marta explained Arthur hadn't been just a safety inspector. He and a research team had sought to create radical methods to push individuals beyond their self-imposed limits. They believed that only a profound shock, one that shattered the illusion of stability, would force true personal growth. At first, the idea was driven by hope, but lines were crossed. Several participants suffered mental breakdowns. A few never recovered. Arthur died trying to halt the project once he realized how dangerous it had become. Mark's mind spun with questions. Could his father have truly led such a reckless mission? Pacing among the dusty equipment, he felt conflict roiling inside him. A part of him admired Arthur's desire to help humanity shed its fears, but another part was appalled that it had been done without regard for safety or ethics. He found a file with his father's handwritten notes. Small shifts sometimes aren't enough to propel a person forward. People cling to the familiar. They need a jolt, but that jolt must never obliterate their spirit. I sense we're on the brink of making a grave mistake. Tears blurred Mark's vision. This was why his father had always insisted no progress without change. But Arthur died when he tried to stop a dangerous path of forced transformations. Before Mark could voice his turmoil, the stranger, Andrew, spoke. Your father knew his plan had gone too far. There's still a chance to salvage his legacy, but only if you have the courage to rewrite it. Marta switched on one of the few working monitors, revealing a short, flickering video clip of Arthur speaking directly into the camera. No progress without change, my son, but the change that doesn't honor our humanity isn't progress at all. Never forget that. The image cut off. Mark felt as though his father were right beside him, telling him to break free from any fear chaining him to old routines, yet to never abandon compassion. A sudden hush enveloped the corridors. An electric buzz whined through the building, and the lights flickered out. In the pitch-black silence, a deep voice echoed in Mark's mind, sending tremors through every fiber of his being. Wake up and start anew. In a flash, he snapped his eyes open, gasping in the dim glow of his bedside lamp. Sweat drenched his sheets. He was in his bedroom. No train, no institute, no half-decayed walls, just the muted hum of traffic outside. For a moment, he couldn't believe it had all been a dream, or was it a message? The words felt more real than ever. No progress without change. His father's dreamlike presence lingered, an ache in his chest that reminded him how fleeting life could be if spent avoiding new possibilities. Mark took a deep breath, heart still pounding. Perhaps the path forward was staring him in the face all along, waiting for him to realize that the greatest barrier to progress was his own dread of leaving the familiar behind. "It's time to start," he whispered, voice quivering but determined. "I won't let fear of the unknown hold me back anymore." Moral of the story: true growth lies in daring to move beyond the confines of comfort. If we refuse to change, we remain forever trapped in our old patterns. But when we embrace the fear of transformation and balance it with compassion for ourselves and others, we open the door to genuine progress.